Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Drabinski, and I work here for Ideas on Fire. And I'm excited that you're here to join us for today's webinar, How to Get It Re-Inspired by an Old Project. And we decided to have this webinar at the beginning of the semester, partly as a way to give us all a pep talk on how to get back into projects that we might be really, really tired of. So hopefully a lot of this will be stuff that you may have thought about already, but we were hoping that we could all use this as a chance to get excited about the projects we have coming up this semester. So the way this webinar will work is, in a second, I will go away, my visage, and then I'll pull up the PowerPoint and walk through it, and then I'll come back and onto the screen. And if you have any questions or comments or ideas for how you get re-inspired, please type them in the little spot right there on the side of the screen, and we can discuss that at the end of the webinar. All right, so I will see you at the end of the PowerPoint. Thank you. All right, so today's webinar is, as I said, how to get re-inspired by an old project. So on tap today, first we're going to talk about where have our old projects gone, how do they end up in the drawer without us. And then we'll discuss picking out where to pick up where we left off. A lot of us have a lot of projects that are half done or are partially started sitting around our homes and offices. So we'll talk about how to pick what project to work on. And then we'll discuss how to set goals to actually get to work on those projects. And then we'll talk about 3 different sort of ways to get inspired. First, to do new writing. Second, to do new research. And third, to make something new out of something old. And that can often be a good way to get inspired to get back to work on something. Then we'll talk a bit about accountability, which can keep us on track even when our inspiration wanes. And then we'll end the webinar by talking about, do we really need to be inspired? And what if it doesn't happen? How do we make ourselves open that file on our computer when all else fails? That is often the hardest thing to do. All right, so when we're talking about how to get re-inspired by old projects, we were thinking about a number of different kinds of old projects that end up languishing. First, the seminar paper. Graduate school coursework is often about producing that 20, 30, 40-page paper at the end of the seminar, but where does it go? If you're lucky, it's read by your professor, but or parts of it can be integrated into a dissertation chapter, but often it just ends up in a drawer. The conference presentation, a lot of us begin those presentations with the lofty goal of turning it into a publication later, and then after the conference, it falls by the wayside. The hastily written blog draft, is there a way to take the kind of casual writing that we do and turn it into something that can reach a wider audience? Then this is a popular project that can sometimes end up on the back shelf, the dissertation. Oh, the dissertation. How do we get ourselves back into it, especially if we found ourselves over the summer working on other projects or working for pay or teaching or traveling or doing research? How do we get back into writing the actual dissertation? There are a lot of reasons why our projects end up not sort of fully flowering. One is boredom. I think this is a really common one. We get bored of a project. It's exciting at the beginning, but the nitty-gritty of actually getting the paper ready for publication with all its footnotes and its bibliography in order can feel just boring. We don't want to do it. Fear of failure, I think, is another big one. As long as we have the idea or the plan to submit the paper for publication, it hasn't been rejected from publication yet. And often it's hard to see our own fear of failure for something, for what it really is. We often have a lot of alibis for this thing that keeps us from finishing, right? Once you send out the paper, it means you're, for publication, it means you're opening yourself to peer review, which is really scary. We're academics. This is our job, right, is to send ideas out in the universe and get feedback on them. But that's often something that's really, really scary for a lot of us, and for good reason, right? Reviewer number 2 is nobody's favorite. Also, newer, shinier projects often come into view, and they take precedence over things that we've been working on before, and they are more exciting, right? New things are often more exciting, and the hard work of finishing something um, isn't as attractive. So, why should we bother getting back to why should we bother getting back to these projects at all? First, I think it's really important to think about how we can reignite our curiosity by picking up these old projects and getting back into them. Much of what is pleasurable about intellectual life is that sense of seeking and finding answers and asking good questions and learning something new. You know that rush that you get when you actually have a new idea or you understand difficult text in a new way. Getting back to our projects is part of getting back to what matters about intellectual life for the rest of life. And then there's the much more banal reason that I put on the slide is called productivity. And this bums me out always because the idea that as academics we need to be producing all the time, I think is detrimental to the kind of thinking and teaching work a lot of us want to do. Just like work outside of the academy, the idea that we have to be productive all the time is really damaging to souls. At the same time, there's the realistic part of our lives that says the way that we get jobs, the way that we meet people, the way that we enter conversations is through publication, through finishing the dissertation, through perfecting the conference presentation. And there are good parts of that, right? It does keep us moving through our thinking and keeps us being creative, but it also has that practical part of actually getting us the things on the CV that we need to get a job, whether it's inside or outside the academy. All right, so how do we pick out where to pick up where we left off? I want to talk a little bit about this because most of us have a lot of projects back there. I know that I have a whole dissertation full of chapters that's just sitting somewhere. How do I choose, though, between that and conference presentations that I've done? How do I pick something to actually work on and move forward? I think the most important thing is to ask, what are your priorities? Are your priorities publication? Are your priorities presentation? Getting things ready for conference season? Is your priority the dissertation? Right? These different priorities will help you decide where you should sort of pick up. So ask yourself, is there a project you need to finish for personal or practical reasons? If you're writing your dissertation, the project you should be picking up and thinking of as new is some part of that dissertation, right? Not a different project. If there's something that you need to finish to get if there are things that are close to finishing that you could get out for possible publication, that's probably the project you want to pick up, right? You can find the loose ends that are closest to being tied, right, and work on those. If there are multiple things that are like that, ask yourself, is there a project that you're a little bit interested in, something that you might still care about, right? Sometimes things get so, we become so disconnected from our work, but if there's something that strikes you slightly interesting or that is relevant to something happening today, right, you might think of a reason why your voice on this subject needs to be out in the world, right? That can be a good project to pick up. And then this final question to ask yourself when making this decision is, do you have to feel inspired to get started? And this webinar is about getting re-inspired by old projects, but I wanted to emphasize that getting inspired or feeling inspired is not at all necessary to get started. So sometimes you just got to pick something for practical reasons. And we'll talk a little bit now about how to get inspired when you're actually not inspired at all. I'm thinking of when you know that you need to finish up this paper, get it out to the journal. Sometimes the hardest part is just opening the document. So if you can get yourself inspired enough to open the document in the first place, you're off to a good start. All right, so once you pick the project you want to work on, I think that it can be really helpful to take a minute and actually write down some goals for the thing that you're working on. Treat it like it's a new project, right? give it a little shine of the new to get help you get excited about it. And for setting goals, I think first, consider what your priorities are. And this is similar to the first slide where we talked about sort of how to set, sort of how to figure out what to work on. Right, so consider your priorities. Are they publishing something? If you are on the job market, this can often be a sort of top priority so that you can say on the CV that it's out for review, even can be helpful. Is your priority finishing? This can often be for personal reasons. So I don't want to tie up a project so that I can permanently move on from it. Or is your priority to start something new, to start new research? If you finish the dissertation, maybe thinking about how to move forward with the next project. That next project maybe is turning the dissertation into the book, but maybe not. If that's your priority, that'll sort of shift where you take this new project. Then you want to finally go ahead and pick something. So pick a seminar paper or a conference presentation or that dissertation chapter and commit to this being a project that you're going to get back into and you're going to get excited about again. Even if you're not excited about it yet, tell yourself you are. And then give yourself a timeline. And this is some common sense stuff, but write it. I think writing it down would actually be helpful because it's easy to have vague goals in our mind. But if you actually set a timeline that breaks projects into smaller tasks, you can actually take that daunting, I don't want to do it, I'm so bored by a project, and turn it into something that you can actually complete. So break a project into smaller tasks of reading, writing, and research, and put those tasks on a calendar. Give yourself some time limits in which to do it. And then consider an accountability system. We'll talk about this later, but an accountability system can be a built-in group of people who are excited about your work, who can make you excited when you're not. And also an accountability system can get you to actually finish the project. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. And then finally, once you've picked a project and you're committed to it, tell other people what you're doing. Sometimes I think that academic life is so solitary and so lonely, and it makes it hard because we have to individually always be getting ourselves excited about our projects, and that's a lot of pressure, right? So if you tell people and talk about your work and what you're thinking about with colleagues, and they talk back to you about what they're working on, not only does it help you stay inspired with your project, but it activates, I think, the best of the intellectual life we're trying to lead. And I think it will keep us all more inspired by the work that we're doing. All right, so let's talk now about some practical ways to try and get re-inspired by these old projects. I want to start by talking about doing new writing. Writing is how we come to know things in the first place. Writing is not a translation of our headspace onto the page, but is itself productive of thought, right? So one thing that I encourage you to try when getting into a new project or getting into an old project is to free write your way back in. And some prompts for that. Write about why you cared about the project in the first place. Why does it matter? What's important about it? Just writing that can help talk yourself into why it matters that you actually get back into it and finish it. That writing can also sometimes come back in as an introduction to something, right? Intellectual work, it's obvious to a lot of us why it matters when we're writing it, or we think it is, but it's not obvious to readers. And writing that, and let yourself be a reader of your own work, right? Write out what matters about it. Writing a new introduction can also be helpful for writing your way back into excitement about a project. Also, you can just write, like just open up the document, read somewhere of what you've written, and then just start writing some thoughts, right, and where you're at. It might be an outline for the next part of the paper. It might be an outline for how to finish it or what you need to do, but just the act of writing in that project can often get you inspired by it again. Another idea is to reverse outline your way back into the project. Sometimes we've let a project go for so long that we don't necessarily even remember what it was about in the first place. So a way to do this is to start by reading through what you've written so far. And this is often the scariest part. I don't know about you, but I really, really get uncomfortable reading my own writing. I feel like I can see all the ways that it is overwrought or under theorized or whatever it is, right? We are often our own harshest critics. But if you can give yourself some distance from it, right? It's an old project, right? So maybe you wrote it, maybe you didn't, right? If you can think about it as something that someone else wrote or treat it the way that you would treat writing by somebody else, that can be sort of a way into doing that. And then write out a plan to fill in the gaps, right? So you can read your own writing, make an outline based on that writing of what the chapter, the article is about, and then figure out what you need to do to finish it up. And that can often take an old project that you've sort of let languish and turn it into something that, oh, with just a month of work, I can get this article out for publication and move it off my desk. And there's nothing, I don't know if there's a better feeling than putting something that's been sitting on your desk for a long time on somebody else's. So this set of strategies about writing our way back into a project all assume and remind us of the ways that writing returns us to curiosity, and it returns us to the learning that got us excited in the first place. And so give this a try as a strategy for getting back into a project. Another way to get inspired is to do new research on a project. And this can, just doing a little bit of reading can get us to shift our thinking about our projects just enough for them to feel new and exciting and inspiring again. So some tips here. First, remind yourself why the project is important, or what was important about it to you to begin with, and why is it important to you now. So this is similar to the previous slide when I said write for yourself why it matters. And then when you're working on your schedule, prioritize reading time. I think when we think about writing, okay, I'm going to spend this many hours a day writing, or I'm going to this many hours a week, or I'm going to write this many pages. Those kind of writing schemes leave out the part of research and reading that is so essential to writing in the first place, right? That we can do reading and note-taking that can get us inspired to write again. So prioritize that reading time, write it into your calendar the way you would anything else, and think of it as part of your writing time. If you just read, honestly, if we read for 30 minutes a day, most of us are reading more than lots of folks in the academy. So prioritizing reading time can be a good way to get curious again, right? And that curiosity is a lot of what gets us inspired to do our work. If you are in an area where you could visit an archive or do some primary research, maybe that's looking through newspaper databases or looking through online archival materials. Remind yourself about primary source texts and how exciting they can be, right? So taking a little time to do that kind of research can also get you inspired by the project again. Another tip for this research is to talk to your peers and colleagues about the research you're doing. I think we don't do that enough. I work at a job where we have a bunch of meetings about how to schedule things and symposia about how to teach well, but we know very little about the day-to-day research and writing of our peers and colleagues, and that is a disservice to the intellectual community that we're trying to build here. And that intellectual community will often keep you inspired till you actually finish that project. Research is, as I say here, research is often what inspires us in the first place, right? We stumble across some text or some set of questions, and it gets us excited to ask our own. That those feelings don't have to just come at the beginning of the project. They can come later when you pick up the project again and can get you inspired again. I wanted to talk now a little bit about how to sort of make something new out of something old. Sometimes it's time to throw in the towel on a project, and that's okay. Not every seminar paper is meant to turn into publication. If you wrote a seminar paper that is close reading of grammatology or something like that, chances are that's not something that is going to turn into a seminar paper. So know when to throw in the towel, and don't think that everything that you write, every seminar paper, every conference presentation has to turn into something that in the private sector they call a deliverable. Right? It doesn't have to do that. It can be an exercise in its own right. So if that's the case, read through your work and find the threads that still interest you. Those threads can be the sort of beginning of a new project. So that seminar paper that's a close reading of something, maybe there's a small part of that paper where you did a site-specific analysis, and maybe that site-specific analysis, that close reading of, say, a lawsuit or something, that's the thing that can be pulled out and made into a new project. So sometimes our old projects are simply the storage area for new beginnings. So consider another thing to do when thinking about making something old into something new is think about what else you could make of your older work that's not just an article. And this can help feel like we're taking those old projects and doing something with them. So there might be parts of your older work that could be turned into pieces of public scholarship, could be turned into blog posts or things or freelance writing pieces that you could pitch. So if you have some part of those old projects that's relevant in contemporary space, that can be a fun way to repurpose it and also to branch out in terms of your writing and also your influence. There may be a tiny seed of an old project that is an interesting new conference presentation that then might turn into another kind of project in the future. Or maybe there's just a small seed from that seminar paper that can be pulled through and help inspire a new chapter of a dissertation or a book project. So sometimes the older work, even if you don't pick it up and make it into something new, can be inspiring as it's transformed, right? And as you take on new projects. I think I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this, partly because I think that the work that we do is generally a culmination of a lot of different kinds of reading and thinking and projects. And if there are bits of those projects that can be usefully repurposed in new ways, I think that's honest to our intellectual journeys. And it also can save us some labor, which is always a good thing. Finally, I wanted to say it's okay to let go of old work if it really doesn't inspire you anymore and you know it never will. Remember that dissertation that I wrote a long time ago that I mentioned just sits in a drawer somewhere? It's actually on a shelf in my office. It's not interesting to me anymore, and I don't think it's important. And so that's not a project that I would pick up again. And that's okay. It's okay to move on from old projects. It's important to be honest with oneself. Like, am I moving on from this project because I'm bored or because I don't think anybody would want to publish it? Those are not necessarily good reasons. But if you really have moved on intellectually from old stuff, it's okay to let it go. Especially if you don't have some sort of like publication number that you have to reach to keep your job or something like that. So those are sort of three ways, I think, of getting re-inspired by old projects. I wanted to talk now a little bit about setting up accountability systems to actually move from, okay, I opened the document, I reversed outlined it, I have 3 major sections I need to rewrite to get it ready for publication, that kind of practical work. How do we move from that to actually finishing it? And I think the key is often accountability. So much of intellectual life is solo, and so we have to actually sort of force an accountability system on ourselves. And accountability systems end up, I think, usually being really, really important and powerful for a lot of us. So they're not a bad thing. So accountability systems will definitely help here. So this slide sort of continues from the last one. It's okay to let go of projects you're not interested in anymore, but be sure you're actually done with the project and not just done with the hassle of finishing, right? Not just bored with it. And then once you sort of pick that project and you're actually going to want to actually take it through to finishing it, here's some accountability systems that can keep us inspired by our work. First, writing groups. And we have a number of, if you search at the Ideas on Fire website, we have a number of blog posts about how to form writing groups that work. We also have a webinar about this. Writing groups can be really helpful because it's a built-in community of other intellectuals who are invested in your ideas and in you finishing. And writing groups might be as simple as we get together and write at the same time, so sort of keep us on track and keep us inspired by the actual act of writing, or they might be groups where we share our writing and critique each other. It really depends on what your goal is. I think often that second writing group is what we assume a writing group can be, but for accountability purposes, you're just looking for a group of people who will, who you can check in with and say you accomplished this task when you said you would, or a group of people who can talk to you about your project and encourage you to keep going. Another accountability system is just a basic peer-to-peer check-in. So you might have, if you're in graduate school, a couple people in your cohort who all have the same goals, and you're checking in with, like, I'm going to text you at the end of every day about how much I wrote. Or setting up, some colleagues of mine set up a Google Doc where people with dates, and people just go in and put an X on each day that they did the writing that they planned to do. So just the simple act of reporting what you did to someone else can be enough to keep you on track in a way that's really hard to do when you're all by yourself. Online groups can also be really helpful for this. So the basic Google Doc or a Facebook group, or I have another set of friends who had a hashtag and they would report what they wrote on the hashtag on Twitter every day. Anything that keeps you on task working on the project on a regular basis is an accountability system that'll move you towards finishing and also keep you excited about your work as you see the progress. And accountability systems help us finish what we started, whether we want to or not. So those moments when inspiration really wanes, the accountability group can pull you through and keep you doing the work you plan to do in the first place. So the last slide is about some other resources, and then ask this question: so do we really need to be inspired, and what if it doesn't happen? What if it just feels like a slog right now? If you are at the end of a dissertation, it's likely going to feel like this. I remember how normal it was in my group of dissertators for all of us to hate our projects and wish we'd never started, and then shortly thereafter we were finished. It's sort of part of the finishing process. So the short answer to this question is no. Feeling excited about a project usually makes it easier to work on because we're interested in it, but it is not at all essential to finishing the project. A tiny spark of inspiration might be just all you need to pick up the project, and the inspiration might go away. But as long as you've got your goals and your accountability system and you're working through it, it's done the work it needed to do, right? That spark of inspiration. And sometimes, as I say here, what can inspire us is knowing that as soon as we get through this, we can put that in the rearview mirror and we don't have to do it anymore, right? Once the conference paper that we meant to turn into a publication has turned into an article draft on someone else's desk, we can move on and do something else. And the feeling of relief that comes with that can be really inspiring. So that can sometimes be enough of an inspiration. I also linked here, and you'll get this slideshow in your email, a couple of resources at Ideas on Fire that I think can help get and stay inspired. The first is a blog post about staying curious about your research with some tips for nurturing the curiosity that got most of us here in the first place. Then we have a post about getting the most out of writing groups. It'll talk about different kinds of writing groups, different ways to set them up, and these, both for accountability and for the purposes of staying inspired, can be really, really helpful. And then finally, we have a post about establishing a regular writing practice. And this, and establishing a regular writing practice is, everyone watching this webinar has heard this before. That's really important. That's how you get your writing done. And it's true, and it's also what can keep projects moving forward on the days that we are not so inspired to work on them. So that can, the writing routine can stand in for inspiration on the days where everything feels a bit like a drag. So those are just a few of the resources we have at Ideas on Fire. All right, so I'm going to return now to all of you. Hello. So that's today's webinar on how to get re-inspired by an old project. Does anybody have any questions or ideas or plans, projects they want to pick up for this semester that they'd like to chat about? If you have anything, you can write it in this little box over here. Otherwise, I will sit quietly. All right. Well, if nobody has anything they want to chat about, I will sign off for today. And I look forward to hearing, we all look forward to hearing about what you've picked up and what you're working on. We have another webinar next month, so please watch your Ideas on Fire email, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.